thank you for inviting me to talk. The weather we're having outside, huh? For those of you who have now moved away to California, this is what Indiana's like. So don't ever forget. So I apologize to anyone who saw my talk earlier. Most of my jokes are canned. So you've all heard my jokes before, and they may seem like I just came up with them, but they're not. My talk is entitled Staying Curious and Paying Attention. And this talk is really more about me than it is necessarily my work, although there's some of that towards the end. And I also want to add to my title, Never Giving Up. So this is me, for those of you who can't recognize me. I am a researcher at the IU School of Medicine. I study Alzheimer's disease. I have a PhD in medical neuroscience. And I am a graduate of Sycamore, 1996. This is our class picture. Note the very dated haircuts, long hair, and bowl cuts on the boys. Jelly shoes. That actually is me. My fashion sense has only slightly changed. I've never given a talk like this. I have given plenty of scientific talks about brain imaging or Alzheimer's disease. I can talk forever about a specific cohort or analysis or algorithm. But this talk is really more about me, and to be honest, it's much more intimidating, I think, to talk about yourself. It certainly scared me, even though I do actually know a few things about myself. So I'm hoping that you'll bear with me while I tell you a little bit about myself and my struggles, and hopefully achieving some measure of success. So Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, all the great speakers were bad speakers at first. So I consider myself not the best speaker. I'm a research scientist, so luckily that's not much in the job description. But I hope that you'll listen to what I have to say and perhaps maybe be able to apply it in some place in your life, whether it's for you or a loved one, and take it to heart. So when I first saw who I was going to be talking next to, before, after, I was very intimidated. These young men are all very talented in their respective fields. And my first instinct was to run and hide, to call in sick with the bird flu, to say I got in some sort of car crash. I didn't, obviously, as I'm sitting here, primarily because that's extremely immature and childish, and I at least try to pretend to be an adult. I may or may not succeed. And I also ran across this quote that says, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And my first instinct is almost always to say, I consent, I'm inferior, I'm sorry. But I tried to take this to heart, and I thought to myself, I'm going to really go out there and just try to tell my story. I maybe have a slightly unique story. I'm not saying it's any better, any worse, any more difficult, less difficult than anyone. They asked me to speak, so that's why I'm telling my story. So one way in which I'm unique, I am not named Chris. Yes, just coincidence that I get to make that joke. Yeah, my parents didn't name me Chris. It was an unfortunate thing for me, clearly. I blame them entirely, and I will be writing to my parents and saying, next time. And if I ever have a kid, I'm hoping that I get to name them Chris. I'm a female scientist, so I am a female in a male-dominated field. That can be a good thing and a bad thing. So a lot of people have talked about females in science, girls in STEM. Sometimes, as a female, my opinion is taken more seriously because I am the only girl in a room. And so thus, my perspective must be the perspective of every woman. I also have had my opinions not taken seriously at all because I am the only woman in a room full of men. And there are still considerable pay disparities. Even in the university, women tend to make less than men. Myself and my colleagues who are females have had to fight just to be paid equivalently to our male colleagues. But that isn't really what I'm here to talk about today. I mean, it's something that comes up a lot, and there are plenty of people out here that could do better justice to that than I could. My talk's really about the obstacles to success. In my life, I've had some obstacles to success. Some of these have been my own making. Some of these have been done to me in some sense. But I think that the obstacles to success are what make us successful. If you just walked into something, then you probably are worth more than that. So that's what I wanted to talk to. So I was a normal kid. I was born in southern Indiana. I was no genius kid like some of the kids at Sycamore. But I was curious and wanted to learn about the world. I also was not a morning person, and that hasn't changed at all. I moved a lot as a kid. I lived in all the places that are circled with red circles. I actually spent the longest time at any one school here at Sycamore than I did up until the time I was in graduate school. So I was here from 4th grade to 8th grade. And it was a great school. It really, I can't even begin to tell you how well it prepared me for my life. And starting high school, I was really like any other kid. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I thought it would be something in math and science. But starting high school, I started to have some difficulties, some problems that emerged. Specifically, I became anorexic. I stopped eating, and I was a perfectionist, and so I was intent on being the best anorexic I could possibly be. I was going to not eat like no one had ever not eaten before. And I was pretty successful, if you were going to say that. In about a year and a half, I went from looking something like this to looking something like this. And like this. I lost a lot, not just weight, but I lost a lot in my life. I lost focus, I lost friends, I had to drop out of school for a period of time. I lost focus on math and science and all the things that I thought I wanted to do with my life. I don't exactly know why, but food became my focus and not eating food. I used to be a good tennis player when I was a kid. And I no longer could do that. I was too thin to really do well at it. I didn't have the energy anymore to go out there and play tennis. And it made me susceptible to injuries. Specifically, I was, believe it or not, sucked into a hot tub drain. And my small stature probably made it so that I had more damage to my back and my shoulder. And that pretty much ended my ability to play tennis for many, many years. And there was very little that changed that for me. I went through high school, I survived, I went through college, began college. And then on September 11th, 2001, as everybody in this room was aware of and was born for, unlike all of the middle school students that I spoke to earlier, which was very scary and made me really feel incredibly old. I watched that day, just like every American, I think, looked and watched and just dumbfounded by what was happening. Watching so many people suffer, so many people die for no reason. They just went to work that day, and their lives were ended. And here I was 19 years old, and I had a life. I was safe. I had all the opportunities ahead of me, and I thought to myself, I am an idiot. I'm focusing all of my energy on food when I could do tons of things with my life, and none of these people were given that chance. So what I decided to do was I dropped out of school that very day. I entered a long-term treatment facility. I was there for a few months and came back to Indiana, and it wasn't a cure. It wasn't like all of a sudden I came back and I was like, perfect. But it put me on a different path than I was headed down. It put me on a path to where I felt that I could be successful in something that I really truly wanted, you know, ever since I was a kid, which was to excel in academia and science. So I don't mean to be depressing to people. Earlier when I gave this talk, I felt like the kids were all like, ooh. And that really isn't my intention. My intention was to tell my story and to hopefully to help them discover that there are going to be obstacles in your life and you have to stay on track. So, not to bring everybody down, I'm going to talk about something that I actually find that makes me very happy, which is my job. I got a PhD in 2011 in medical neuroscience, as I mentioned at the outset. And how many people in this room have seen The Big Bang Theory? Even all the kids mostly had seen it. So my job is kind of like that. A little bit. It's sometimes eerie how well they capture the scientists being so esoteric and being so socially inept at time to time. There are days that I go to work and it's almost like I watch the show and I think, yeah, I could see it. My significant other says that I'm a lot like Amy Farrah Fowler. She's actually a neuroscientist on the show, which I think is kind of cool. I tell him that means that he is a lot like Sheldon, which with his quirks, I don't know. He thinks he's more like Penny, but who am I to judge? So I'm going to switch gears and not talk so much about myself, but talk about the things that I think are important for my job. The first thing is staying curious. I wouldn't be very good at my job if I wasn't curious. As a scientist, you have to ask questions all the time, you know, try to think of things in new ways. Now, as we get older, I think we somewhat lose this ability. I think we get stuck in a routine or a rut and we say, you know, oh, yesterday's the same as today is the same as tomorrow. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily any better at that than anyone else, but one time when I do get a good chance to think is when I'm stuck in traffic. When I'm on my way to my job or home from my job, and I try to think about new questions that you know, maybe I hadn't thought of before, or at least I hadn't thought of in that way before, and then I make plans for when I hopefully eventually get to work, or for the next day at work, to figure out, try to test those questions. You know, how can I look at this question one way or another to hopefully answer some questions that I think are important to Alzheimer's disease specifically, because that's what I work on, but you know, more generally to the field of science. And you know, this comes off looking a bit egotistical, but I have been somewhat successful. I've published a number of articles in the field of Alzheimer's disease. In particular, I have interest in early markers of Alzheimer's disease, so how to detect it earlier in people who are aging, as well as lifestyle factors that are important either to make you more likely or to prevent you from getting Alzheimer's disease. And that kind of leads me to the other thing that I consider an important thing for my job, which is paying attention. Now, it sounds easy to pay attention, but there's probably a few people in the audience who have now zoned off from me speaking, so it's not as easy as it might sound. You know, pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to your family members, your friends. You know, your family and friends, you know, at least for the most part, are human beings also. You know, the issues that they have, the problems that they have, are the problems that probably all humans have. And if you really want to try to understand and study and help humans, it's worthwhile just looking around you and looking and seeing what kinds of problems do they have and how can I help them and ultimately hopefully help the world. This is a picture of my grandmother. She's now over 90. And a few years ago, she was put on a medication called an anticholinergic. Now, the ins and outs of what the medications do is not really important. It's a medication, it's a type of medications that's available over the counter and prescription. And it had been known prior to that that it was not a great medication to use in older adults because it causes cognitive problems and an increased risk for dementia. Now, I don't blame my grandmother's doctor or her primary care physician for doing this. A lot of doctors don't know this, cutting edge science, but she did start to decline. Her cognition started to decline, and I don't know that it was because of the medication, but it probably didn't help, especially at her advanced age of being in her upper 80s. So it inspired me. I was paying attention to my family and the issues that my family was facing. And so in the beginning of this year, I published an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association looking at this class of drugs, specifically using neuroimaging, which was the first time that had been done. And I looked at brain function and structure and found that the brain functioned more poorly, and there was actual brain shrinkage in older adults who were using this class of medications regularly relative to those who weren't. And this was the first study to actually find a biological reason for why these drugs might be having the cognitive outcomes they were having. So in summary, never give up. Don't let anybody tell you you can't be whatever it is you want to be. Now, that was a sentiment somewhat designed for the middle schoolers earlier, but I think it's true for all of us. Never let somebody tell you you can't do what you want to do, even if that person is yourself. Stay curious, ask questions. Don't ever just accept somebody's word for something just because they told it to you. Ask them why or how or when. That's the only way you'll ever truly uncover something unique and novel. And pay attention to those around you. Your family and your friends are your best test bed for what might work in human beings, so you might as well use it. And with that, I would like to dedicate this talk to a friend of mine, Justin. Justin passed away earlier this year, and I'd like to dedicate this talk to him. And that's it.